I was in the garage when my phone buzzed, and I almost ignored it. I had both hands covered in grease from the lawnmower engine I'd been nursing back to life all morning, the same machine my son had been asking me to throw out for 2 years. It was a Saturday in October, the kind of cool gray morning that makes you want to stay busy just to keep warm. And I had been perfectly content out there with my tools and the radio playing oldies low in the background. The text was from my accountant, a man named Edward Holt. I had trusted him with my finances for 22 years, since back when I was still running crews for Donnelly Brothers Construction, out of Columbus. His message had no greeting, no preamble. It said, "Don't sign anything tonight. Call me right now." Edward never texted. Not once in 22 years. He called always because he thought texting was for people who didn't take things seriously. I wiped my hands on a shop rag and dialed. He answered before the first ring finished. "Norman," he said, "I need you to listen to me very carefully and don't react until I'm done talking." I leaned against the workbench. "Go ahead." "Your son called my office on Thursday. He didn't identify himself at first. Said he was calling on your behalf, wanted to discuss a power of attorney instrument that would allow him to manage your accounts directly. He said you'd been having episodes. Confusion, he said. Forgetting bill payments, leaving the stove on, that kind of thing." I didn't say anything. He mentioned a Dr. Ellison. Said the doctor had already drafted a statement about your cognitive state. "Norman," I put the phone down and called your regular physician, Dr. Carver at Riverside. "He told me he hasn't seen you in 4 months and that your last visit was completely routine. No flags, no concerns. Your blood work was excellent." I looked at the lawnmower. The afternoon light was coming through the single garage window, falling across the engine parts laid out on the concrete floor. "There's a dinner tonight," I said. It came out flat. "I know," Edward said. "Your son invited himself to your house for dinner tonight. The paperwork is likely coming with him." My son's name is Darren. He is 41 years old. He manages a sporting goods store in Westerville, and he has been very interested in my retirement savings since my wife Dorothy passed 16 months ago. Dorothy and I were married for 37 years. She was a school teacher. She was the kind of woman who remembered every student's name, even decades later, and she never once raised her voice at anyone in anger. She died of a cardiac event in her sleep. There was no warning. I woke up, and she was gone, and the world has been a quieter place ever since. What Darren did not know, and what I had never bothered to explain to him, was that Dorothy and I had been careful with money our entire lives. We had never lived extravagantly. We drove practical cars, took one real vacation every few years, kept our house modest and our bills paid. Over 40 years of working and saving, what we had accumulated was quietly substantial. I owned the house outright. I had a brokerage account, 2 IRAs, and a small piece of a commercial property on the east side of Columbus that Edward managed as a rental income stream. I also still received a consulting fee from Donnelly Brothers twice a year for advisory work I did during their expansion in 2019. Darren knew I was comfortable. He didn't know the full picture, and I had never shown it to him because there had never been a reason to. There was a reason now. "Edward," I said, "who is Dr. Ellison?" A pause. That's where it gets worse. I had my assistant look into him this afternoon. He's a psychiatrist who lost his hospital privileges at Grant Medical 2 years ago after a billing fraud investigation. He currently operates a solo practice out of a strip mall in Guyana. He has 3 active complaints with the Ohio Medical Board. I closed my eyes for a second. "How far along is this?" I asked. "Far enough that your son has already spoken to a real estate attorney about the property on Morse Road. He wants it liquidated. He is also, and I want to be careful how I say this, he is also 3 months behind on his car payment and has a personal loan from a credit union that went into collections in August." I stood up straight. The thing about Darren is that I had seen the signs and chosen to look away from them. The way he talked about money whenever he visited, circling it, testing the edges. The questions about whether I'd updated my will after Dorothy died. The comment at Thanksgiving last year, almost offhand, that the house was too big for one person, and had I considered downsizing. I had chalked it up to concern. I had told myself that's what adult children did when a parent was aging. I had wanted very badly to believe that. "Don't do anything yet," I said to Edward. "Let him come tonight. Let him bring whatever he's bringing. Edward was quiet for a moment. Norman, you're sure? I'm sure, but I need the name of a private investigator, someone good. By the time Darren arrived at 6 o'clock, I had made a pot of roast beef and vegetables, the same meal his mother used to make on Sunday nights when he was growing up. I had set the table the way Dorothy always set it, with the cloth napkins and the good plates, not because it was a special occasion, but because I wanted him to feel the weight of what he was walking into without knowing it yet. He came in the back door the way he always did, without knocking. He was wearing a polo shirt and khakis, dressed like a man who had put in modest effort. He had his girlfriend with him, a woman named Serena, who I had met 3 times in the past year. She was pleasant enough in small doses. She smiled too much when she was nervous. Hey, Dad. Darren shook my hand. He used to hug me when he was younger. That stopped around the time Dorothy died. Glad you came, I said. Sit down. Dinner's ready. We ate. Darren talked about the store, about some inventory system they were switching to, about a guy in his department who kept calling in sick. Normal conversation. Filler. Serena complimented the roast beef twice. I watched his eyes drift to the bookshelf in the dining room, where Dorothy's good china was displayed, and I watched him calculating. After I cleared the plates, he put a folder on the table. So, he said, and his voice shifted into a register I didn't recognize. Rehearsed. Careful. There's something Serena and I have been wanting to talk to you about, and I want you to know it comes from a place of love. I sat down. I folded my hands on the table. We've been worried, he said. Since Mom passed, you've been alone out here, and we've noticed some things. The time you forgot about my birthday call. The check you wrote to the wrong utility company. Dad, these things add up. You're right, I said. I have been a little scattered. Serena reached across the table and put her hand on mine. That's why we want to help. We just want to take some of the burden off you. Darren opened the folder. Inside was a document, several pages, with a tab marked for signature near the back. Dr. Ellison prepared a brief statement, he said, producing a single sheet. Nothing formal. He just confirmed that some level of support could be beneficial at this stage. And this document just allows me to help you manage the day-to-day. Bills, account access, that kind of thing. I looked at the document. I didn't touch it. It was a durable power of attorney, broadly written, covering financial assets, real property, and medical decision-making. It wasn't the help with bills document Darren had described. It was a full transfer of legal authority over my life. Can I read it tonight? I asked. I want to go through it carefully. Darren smiled. The smile didn't reach his eyes. Of course. But the sooner we get this done, the sooner we can stop worrying about you. I appreciate that, I said. I walked them out at 8 o'clock. Darren gave me another handshake at the door. Serena hugged me this time, and I could smell her perfume, something expensive and slightly desperate. I watched their car back out of the driveway and disappear down the street. Then I went inside and called Edward. Get me that PI, I said. His name was Gary Combs. He had been a fraud investigator with the Ohio Attorney General's office for 14 years before going private. He was a compact, quiet man who looked like he repaired motorcycles on the weekends and asked no unnecessary questions. He came to my house Sunday morning with a cup of coffee and a yellow legal pad and sat at my kitchen table while I told him everything. He listened without interrupting. The doctor, he said when I finished. Ellison. He's the weak point. A man with active board complaints and a fraud history doesn't take risks for free. He's being paid or he's being pressured. Either way, he'll break. Can you find out? Give me 48 hours. Gary was back Monday afternoon. He sat across from me with his legal pad, and he had the look of a man who had seen a lot of bad things, and this one had made the list. Your son has been in contact with Ellison since July, he said. 3 office visits on record, one of which Ellison billed to a fake patient name. I pulled Darren's credit report through a public court filing. He defaulted on a personal loan in August, like your accountant said. He has a judgment against him from a contractor in April. He's been selling personal items online for cash. He is in serious financial trouble, and he has been building this case against you methodically for 4 months. He slid a printed page across the table. There's more. He called a real estate broker specializing in estate liquidations in September. The broker pulled comps on your Morse Road property without your knowledge or authorization. That's not illegal exactly, but it shows planning. This didn't just happen because he was worried about you, Norman. This was a project. I looked at the printed page. My son's name was on it, his email address, the broker's responses. What about the girlfriend? I asked. Gary set down his coffee. Serena Wakefield. She worked in healthcare administration until 18 months ago. She left that job, let's say, under complicated circumstances involving billing irregularities that were investigated but not prosecuted. She knows how these systems work, the power of attorney language, the way the Ellison documentation is framed. That's her work, not Darren's. Your son is the face of this. She's the architect. I sat with that for a while. I thought about all the Sunday night dinners Dorothy had made, the roast beef, the cloth napkins. I thought about the way she had lit up when Darren was born, how she used to sit in the rocking chair by the window and sing to him in a voice so quiet I'd have to stand in the doorway just to hear it. I thought about how she would feel sitting at this table, looking at these printed pages. Then I'd put the feeling down. Not away, just down. There would be time for it later. Right now, I needed to be the man who spent 40 years running construction crews, the man who could read a blueprint in the dark and catch a flaw in the foundation before the concrete was poured. All right, I said to Gary. Here's what I need. Gary wired me with a recording device Thursday morning, a small flat transmitter taped inside my left shirt pocket. He wore a linen jacket and waited in a car parked on the street 2 houses down, monitoring the feed in real time. I had called Darren Tuesday and told him I'd thought it over, and I was ready to discuss the document. He was at my door Thursday evening at 5:30 with Serena and the folder and a bottle of wine he'd bought at a gas station. I had also called Dr. Ellison. I had told his receptionist I was having chest pains and wanted an evaluation. He had an opening Friday, but I pushed, said I was anxious, and he offered me a Thursday slot before Darren's visit. I went to his office at 3 in the afternoon. The suite was in a strip mall between a nail salon and a tax preparation service. The waiting room had 2 chairs and a water cooler, and a receptionist who didn't make eye contact. Dr. Ellison was a small man in his late 50s with a careful beard and the kind of suit that looks expensive until you get close. He shook my hand with both of his. Norman, he said, your son has told me so much about you. I'll bet he has, I said. The evaluation lasted 11 minutes. He asked me a handful of orientation questions. What year, who was president, what day of the week, and I answered some correctly and fumbled others, just enough to support a narrative without being obvious. He asked about my sleep, my appetite, whether I ever felt confused when I woke up. I told him sometimes. He wrote steadily the entire time. Then he said, I think what your son has arranged is really in your best interest, Norman. The document he's having you sign is a protective measure. People in your situation often feel resistant at first. That's actually a symptom of the condition, the inability to perceive the need for help. I looked at him. Which condition is that, doctor? I asked. He paused. Age-related cognitive decline, early stage. Based on this 11-minute conversation, his pen stopped moving. I leaned forward slightly. I kept my voice calm and even, the way I used to keep it on the job site when I needed a foreman to understand something without raising the alarm. I want to make sure I understand the process, I said, because I looked up the Ohio Administrative Code last night. Section 4 found 313A02. That's the standard of care requirement for psychiatric evaluations used in legal proceedings. It requires at minimum a 2-hour structured clinical interview, collateral interviews with at least one family member independent of the petitioner, and review of prior medical records. How many of those steps have you completed? The room got very quiet. I could hear the air conditioning vent above us. Ellison cleared his throat. This is a preliminary assessment. That will be used in a legal document, I said. A durable power of attorney with medical decision-making authority. I let that sit for a second. I'm also curious how you know my son. He contacted me as a concerned family member. When did he first contact you? Ellison looked at the door. Doctor, I said, I'm not trying to embarrass you. I'm giving you an opportunity to decide what kind of morning you want to have tomorrow. I touched my shirt pocket just once. A small gesture that meant nothing unless you knew what it meant. I have a follow-up appointment with my actual physician on Monday. Dr. Carver at Riverside. He'll be reviewing any documentation generated from this visit. I stood up. Have a good evening, I said. I walked out through the waiting room and past the receptionist and into the parking lot where the October air hit me cold and clean, and I sat in my truck for a full minute before I started the engine. That evening, Darren sat at my kitchen table with a folder in front of him. Serena was next to him with her hands folded, performing concern. He slid the document across to me. I picked it up. I read the first 2 pages slowly, making a show of squinting at the fine print. This is a lot of legal language, I said. It's standard, Serena said. Nothing unusual in there. Darren, I said, looking at my son. You know the Morse Road property? Your mother and I bought that in 2003. Did you know she picked it out? We drove around on a Sunday afternoon, looked at 3 different buildings, and she pointed at that one and said, That one looks solid. Just like that. Darren shifted in his chair. I'm bringing it up, I said, because I saw that you had a broker pull comps on it in September, without asking me. The air in the room changed. Serena's smile stayed put. It was a trained smile, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes. Darren looked at the table. We were just exploring options, he said, in case you decided you wanted to simplify things. You explored my property without my knowledge or consent, I said. My voice was still level. I set the document down on the table and smoothed it flat with my palm. And you hired a doctor with a fraud history to produce documentation calling me incompetent, and you drafted the legal instrument that would give you control of every asset I own. Darren looked up. There it was. The moment when the mask slips and you see the calculation underneath. Dad, you can stop. I said it quietly. I want you to listen to me now. The way I used to make your mother listen when something was important. Are you listening? He didn't answer. I recorded the meeting with Dr. Ellison this afternoon. I have your communications with him going back to July. I have the broker correspondence about Morse Road. I have the credit report and the default judgment and the collections account. I paused. And I have this conversation. Serena pushed back from the table. You can't record people without. Ohio is a one-party consent state, I said. I'm a party to every conversation I've been in. I can record whatever I want. There was a long silence. Outside, a car passed on the street. The refrigerator hummed. Darren put his elbows on the table and his face in his hands. I just needed some help, he said, and his voice had changed completely. The rehearsed tone was gone. What was left sounded like a tired, scared man. The loan, the store, everything went sideways at the same time. I didn't know what else to do. You could have come to me, I said. He looked up. His eyes were red. And say what? That I'm 41 years old and I can't pay my car payment? That I've been a failure since Mom died and I can't hold anything together? I looked at my son. I saw the boy who used to fall asleep on the couch watching baseball with me on Friday nights. I saw the man he had become and the choices he had made, and the woman sitting next to him who had helped him make the worst ones. I felt the weight of both of those things at the same time. Yes, I said, that's exactly what you could have said. I stood up and walked to the back door and opened it. Serena, I said, please leave my house. She looked at Darren. He didn't say anything. She gathered her purse and walked out without a word. I heard her car start and pull away. I came back and sat down across from my son. We sat there for a while. The roast beef I'd made was still on the stove. The kitchen smelled like it used to on Sunday nights when Darren was 9 years old, and the world was a smaller, more manageable place. Here's what's going to happen, I said. Tomorrow morning, I'm meeting with Edward. We are going to look at the debt, your car, the loan, the judgment, and we are going to restructure it. Not a gift. A loan, documented, with repayment terms. Edward will draft it. You will sign it, and you will pay it back every cent over time because that is what adults do. Darren stared at the table. Dr. Ellison is going to receive a letter from my attorney in the morning, I continued. He will voluntarily withdraw the assessment document or face a formal complaint to the medical board and a referral to the AG's office for fraud. I suspect he'll choose the first option. And the broker who pulled comps on my property without authorization is going to receive a similar letter. And me? Darren asked. That depends entirely on what you do next. I leaned forward. I am not going to pretend tonight didn't happen, but I am also not going to call the police on my own son for something we can still step back from. What I am telling you is that the road you were on ends tonight. The woman you brought into this house, who designed this plan, who leveraged your desperation to try to steal from your father, she does not come back here. That is not a request. Darren nodded. He looked older than 41. I'm sorry, Dad, he said. It came out rough, like it had been sitting in his throat for a long time. I know, I said. I sent him home at 9:30. I stood on the porch and watched his taillights until they disappeared. The night was cold and still, and the neighbor's oak tree was dropping leaves onto my driveway in slow, lazy spirals. I went inside and sat in Dorothy's chair. She had a particular chair in the living room, a green upholstered wingback she'd had since before we were married. I never sat in it when she was alive. It was hers. After she died, I still didn't sit in it for almost a year, but lately, on nights when the house felt too big, I would sit there and look at the room from her angle, the way she used to look at it, and something about that particular view made the silence feel less like a hole and more like just a room. I sat there for a long time. The loan we structured took 3 weeks to formalize. Darren signed the repayment agreement without argument. He made his first payment on time. The second one, too, 2 days early. Serena was not in the picture by the time the ink was dry. I don't know the details, and I didn't ask. That was his business to sort out. Ellison withdrew the assessment document within 48 hours of receiving the attorney's letter. He did not contest it. The brokers sent a written apology that was clearly drafted by a lawyer and contained nothing that admitted wrongdoing. But the context stopped. I kept the Morse Road property. I had an offer come in the following spring from a physical therapy group who wanted to lease the space. I signed a 5-year lease and celebrated by taking Edward to a steak dinner and tipping the waiter an amount that embarrassed Edward and delighted the waiter. In February, I drove to a small nonprofit on the north side of Columbus that I'd been reading about. They worked with elderly adults who were victims of financial exploitation. Most of them with no resources to fight back. No Edward Holt. No Gary Combs. Nobody in their corner who knew the rules. I wrote them a check. I told the director, a sharp-eyed woman named June, who looked like she had heard every sad story and still chose to show up every morning, that I might be able to do more than write a check. She looked at me carefully. What kind of more? I ran construction crews for 30 years, I said. I know how to build a case. I know how to read documents. And I know what this particular kind of betrayal feels like from the inside. June hired me as a volunteer consultant the following Monday. 3 months later, Darren came for dinner on a Sunday. He came alone. He knocked this time, which he had never done before, and when I opened the door, he handed me a dish, covered in foil, and said, I made the pot roast. Mom's recipe. I called Aunt Ruth to get it. I didn't say anything for a moment. I just looked at my son standing on the porch with his mother's recipe in his hands. Come in, I said. It smells right. We ate at the table, with the cloth napkins. We didn't talk about October. We talked about his store, about a kid he'd hired recently who reminded him of himself at 22, about whether the Buckeyes had a real shot this season. We talked about Dorothy, about a specific trip to Myrtle Beach in 1998 when she sunburned her nose so badly she wore a zinc stripe on it for the rest of the week and laughed about it the entire time. After dinner, we sat on the back porch with coffee, watching the yard go dark. The lawnmower I had fixed in October was parked in the garage. It ran perfectly now. She would have been so angry at me, Darren said quietly. Yes, I said, but she would have forgiven me anyway. Yes, I said, she would have. The stars were coming out over the oak trees in Columbus in November. They come out cold and sharp, and if you sit still long enough, they feel less like decoration and more like the actual ceiling of things. I am 69 years old. I have buried a wife and nearly lost a son and rebuilt something from the rubble of both of those events. Not quickly, not cleanly, but honestly. Dorothy used to say that the truth always costs you something. But the lie always costs you more. She was right about most things. Some people ask whether I regret not calling the police, whether I let Darren off too easy. And I understand the question, because what he tried to do was real, and it was serious, and it could have destroyed everything I spent my life building. But I think about June at the nonprofit, reading those case files every morning. I think about the people in those files who had no one to call, no accountant who texted them in time, no history of reading the fine print. I think about what it means to have a son who made a catastrophic mistake and chose differently when given the chance to. I don't know how this ends. No father does. But I know what I built, and I know what survived, and I know that when I sit in Dorothy's chair in the evening and the house is quiet, I don't feel like a man who was beaten. I feel like a man who is still standing in a house he built with his own hands. That's enough for me. There's a moment, somewhere in the middle of all of it, when you stop feeling betrayed and start feeling something quieter. Not peace exactly, more like clarity. The kind that only comes after something has been broken open and you've had to look at every piece on the floor. I think about the Saturday morning I was in the garage with grease on my hands and the radio playing low. That was the last morning I was naive about my own son. Edward's text changed that, and as painful as that was, I've come to believe that the truth arriving late is still better than the truth never arriving at all. What you do with it once it lands. That's where character is actually made. Darren made choices that nearly cost him everything. But I want to be careful here, because it would be easy to reduce him to a villain and leave it at that. What I saw, sitting across from him at that kitchen table after Serena left, was not a bad man. It was a frightened one, a man who had confused desperation with entitlement, who had let someone else's cunning fill the space where his own moral backbone should have been. That distinction matters to me. It matters because I had to decide what kind of father I was going to be after the worst night of our relationship. The way I see it, there are really only 3 things that determine how a person handles a crisis. The first is whether they know right from wrong and choose accordingly, not when it's easy, but when it costs them something. Darren failed that test the first time. He chose the shortcut. He let Serena architect a plan that would have stripped his father of his legal identity, and he told himself it was for my benefit. That is a failure of conscience. Not a permanent one, as it turned out, but a real one. The second thing is whether a person can think clearly under pressure. I'm not talking about book smarts. I'm talking about the ability to slow down when everything in you wants to react, to read the situation, to know which move is the right move and which one only feels satisfying. Gary Combs had it. Edward had it. I had enough of it left, after 37 years of marriage and 40 years on job sites, to know that calling the police that night was not the answer I was looking for. The evidence was there. The option was there. I chose differently, not out of weakness, but out of a calculation that my son might still be worth the longer bet. The third thing is the hardest. It's the willingness to keep going after you've been knocked down, not with rage, not with bitterness, but with your hands steady and your eyes open. Dorothy had that quality more than anyone I've ever known. She would have been devastated by what Darren tried to do, but she would have been back at that kitchen table the following Sunday with the cloth napkins out, because she understood that you don't abandon a person at their worst if there is any reasonable evidence they might find their way back to better. He made his second loan payment 2 days early. He knocked before he came inside. Those are small things. But in my experience, small things done consistently are the only foundation that actually holds. I still sit in Dorothy's chair some evenings and look at the room from her angle. I still think about what she would say. Mostly I think she would tell me that I handled it about as well as a stubborn man with grease on his hands possibly could. She would say that with a smile that meant she was proud of me, and she would mean it, and she would also let me know with a look that she was keeping score. That's enough for me.